Alan, last week we were talking about St. Irenaeus and that line, the glory of God is his sons and daughters fully alive.
Yes.
And riffing into that, pushing into that to realize the reason that's the glory of God is twofold. One, it is because it is his purpose. Mm-hmm. It brings no glory to God to have people still in their grave clothes, right? Lazarus out of the tomb, and then Jesus says, now take off the grave clothes, like set him truly free.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
It gives God no glory, and it gives the gospel no power of witness if people are largely unchanged,
right?
If they don't get better, kinder, happier, right? Okay, so that's part of why the glory of God, humanity fully alive, is because that's our Papa's heart. That's the mission of the gospel. That is what Jesus has come to do.
Yes.
Okay. But also because as we are being restored and recreated, it gives God glory to see us bringing glory to the world, like the things that we do. Because people will say that, they'll watch someone, a teenager at her dance performance, and they'll say, oh my goodness, she was in her glory.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
They will.
Oh, I love that phrase, because you go, there it is.
Yes.
That's also glory there. Welcome back, everybody. You're in the Wild at Heart podcast. If you didn't know that, John Eldridge, Alan Arnold, part 2 of a conversation around what does human flourishing look like? How does it express itself? And why is it so intricately tied to creativity and to creative expression, however that may come in a person's life? So more on that this week, including our own kind of writing careers and how and why we write. So if you want some writing tips, stick around. But first, let's take our pause. Father, Jesus, Holy Spirit, I release the world to you. I release the chaos. I release the news. I release the drama around me in my life. What do you need to release, friends? Just keep releasing. I give everyone and everything to you, meaning what? That you need to release right now. Breath of God, breathe life into me now. Breath of God, breathe into my heart, my soul, my mind, my strength, your very life. Breath of life, breath of God, breathe into me now. And meet me here in this week's podcast. In Jesus' name, amen. Oh man, I could linger in those pauses.
Me too.
I really could. I hadn't used the pause app for a long time.
Yes.
We built it. We really worked it. We all used it a lot. But the other day I was fried when I pulled into the driveway, turn off the ignition, just sit there for a moment. I'm like, I need help pausing.
Mm-hmm.
I need help. I need assistance. And so I put on the 3-minute pause, the female voice that's on there, which is so lovely. I needed to hear a woman telling me mercifully to pause. Oh, it was so good. It was so life-giving.
It was it's a rescue to me every time I go to it. And I've been meaning to tell you, I'd like a 20-minute pause if you can create that.
Right.
Because now 10 feels way not enough.
Working on some new features there. We really are. Last week, riffing on the idea of Genesis, if all you knew about the God who made us and the world, if all you knew in Genesis chapter 1 was, okay, he's powerful, clearly, like omnipotent, like just phenomenally powerful to create oceans and waterfalls and caribou and hummingbirds. and so precise, so distinctive. He's wildly powerful and wildly creative. And that's about all we know when humanity says you are made in that image. Okay, so that's kind of where we were launching out from last week, and creativity. What lingers for you from last week?
Just the picture of the woman that you left us with last week, the elderly woman who had shut down.
The ballerina.
Yes.
Yes.
And then slowly was finding really her heart and her joy through the art of dancing and becoming a ballerina again like that. That to me was such a moving picture of what we're all invited to do as you said, like throw off the grave clothes, using another analogy of, the story of Lazarus. And God invites us into a life of freedom and joy and to make beautiful things.
Yes.
Yeah.
As our humanity is restored.
Yes.
And that's really crucial to that.
Yes.
What lingers for me, Alan, was your thoughts about shame and Kurt Thompson's book, and the idea that shame got in so early into the human story and it shuts us down.
Yes.
And that, the little girl who doesn't want to wear her sweater because none of the other little girls have sweaters on, or that sort of thing. I'm so aware of that when I want to do something creative or expressive, I'm going to paint a room, I'm going to change the way our garden is, almost always there's that voice of, but what will other people think about this?
Right.
Will people like what I've done?
Right.
And it just causes that, instead of a heart that's free, it causes that, the fig leaves. It causes the hiding, the pullback. Be better to play it safe.
Right.
Reach for control, like you were talking about the authors last week. So I thought that piece on shame was really, really helpful for me.
Me too. The book is amazing. And one of the things it really highlights is God wants us to know him fully and for us to be fully known by him. And shame is the barrier that steals that, because when we have shame, we no longer want to be fully known. We want to hide, right? As you were talking about the fig leaves and covering and and our creativity, our gifting is risky in that it exposes something within us to the world.
That's good.
And if we're afraid to be known, then we often hide that part of ourselves, right?
Yeah, that's really good. To be restored and to choose to come out of hiding, right? And not to play it so safe allows a person to be more expressive, to rule and subdue, be fruitful and multiply, to exercise fierce mastery, whatever that may look like in their summer, this summer, whatever it may look like in their career or the choice of a new career or going back to school So many of our listeners don't know that after your, long career in publishing and then the 10 years producing 500 some novels, working with authors, that kind of went dormant in you, and you lost some joy until about, was it 5 years ago? You began working with authors again.
Yeah. Well, it ended up being probably, I've been with Wild at Heart 11 years, and it was probably in the second or third year. So 2-3 years after I'd been out of publishing. And it took about 2 or 3 years because I found myself having to detox from what was like a conveyor belt of productivity, where stories had deadlines and dollar signs, and it was a business. And some of the joy and love of story got lost in that high stress, striving productivity model that I was in. And about 3 years after I came here, I started to realize, but I don't want the joy to be stolen. And now that I've had some time away from that, I actually have been given a gift from God to help storytellers bring their story and their creativity to life.
Yes.
To life. And not just storytellers, but people with their creativity. And And God said, yeah, Alan, I'm inviting you to go after the hearts of creatives. And so now for about a decade, that's been something on the side that, John, I love to do because it's a doorway to intimacy with God. When you help people find what they love to do and then help them understand how to do it with God, not for God, not for necessity or productivity, but with God as a dance more than as this duty, they come alive in a way. And then I've had so many creative people say, when you were helping me, I thought it was really more for my art, but do you realize this intimacy with God thing works in all areas of life? I'm like, so it's a back door to the main goal, which is union, intimacy with God.
Yeah, I love that. And so speaking at conferences, you have a website, that kind of thing. We can put that in the notes. That's not what this podcast is about.
Right.
We're not trying to encourage everybody to become authors, but what we are saying is it's a way of participating with God in your restoration.
Yes.
And what was fascinating about the ballerina story, the Alzheimer's dementia patient, Oliver Sacks he's done some work on people with deep, deep, deep brain trauma and some of the strange brain conditions that just shut people down. And they discovered that music is not located in one place in the brain. Like decision-making is, and fear is, and the fight or flight, response is located in your lizard brain, and each of those things. They can't find where music is located because if certain parts of your brain are harmed through illness or injury or age, the rest of the brain will take over and will still respond to music.
Whoa.
Isn't that the coolest thing?
Amazing, yeah.
I love that.
I'd never heard that.
The book is called Musicophilia, and he's telling these stories about music alone. And so, he will be in care facilities and retirement facilities and memory care units. And if they know, this gal, she was the church pianist, or he was the preacher or something, and they'll start singing hymns. And a person who cannot tell you their name will suddenly, out of, they don't even know, where does this happen? Yeah. They will suddenly remember, great is thy faithfulness. And they'll start singing with it, recalling the lyrics. I just think that is exquisitely beautiful.
I do too.
That somehow the imago Dei in us is so deeply woven into creativity within each of us in our own unique way, our own unique capacities, that it is both an expression of our restoration, and it is a tool and vehicle, medicine, a help, a therapy, literally art therapy, to our restoration. It's both of those things. Right? So as you begin to get more of your heart back and detoxing, you get back into the world of creatives, and you are coming alive. Not just them. Right?
I love it. And yes, I could feel my heart just like becoming invigorated because I knew it was a way to bring people to something they had forgotten or never experienced or felt that they were too old or it was too late. Or they were too young and had to wait a decade. And so, John, it's been amazing, but I really do believe like no great art can be created without great heart. Like if your heart goes numb, the art will follow. And I think that's so relevant today because we live in such hard, chaotic times that one of the first things to go that we let go, that we lose hope in, is our creativity and our passions. And the things that make life beautiful and good. And I'm talking about like, don't think of a canvas necessarily or a novel, but think about as a coach, you decide, what's the point in coaching fourth grade basketball? Or what's the point in putting flowers in our house? Like it's all of those things, right? And so I think the enemy, you've termed what's happening as decreation before.
Yes, that's right.
And I think that that's a very powerful term, because God is a God of creation.
Yes.
The enemy isn't creative, but he is a destroyer and one of chaos.
Yeah.
And so he decreates. And so we get invited, sons and daughters, to step into the world and bring beauty and order and life out of chaos.
Yeah.
Just as God did in Genesis,
Yes.
if we will.
I love that. So we're both writers,
Yeah.
published authors, and we have never had a conversation.
Mm-mm.
I don't know why, with each other
Right.
about how you write. So when you talk about creating with God,
Yes.
this could be meals, vacations. This could honestly be research. This can express itself in so many different
Yes.
human personalities.
Yes.
But when you talk about creating with God, that's a very unique phrase and a unique idea. So when you set out, describe that for us personally.
Okay.
When you set out to write a new book,
Yes.
or create a new talk, or prepare for a conference,
Right.
what's going on? What does that look like in terms of you, God, heart, creativity?
Yes.
How does that go?
Well, it never begins with the thought, I want to write another book, or I want to give another talk, because I think those are really bad reasons. The books and talks that start there probably never needed to be born, because it began with a task that you tried to then fill in the empty space with things. And so,
okay, I'm going to stop you as you go along, because
Okay.
that's like a really big idea. I can hear people going, holy cow. You mean to start with task sort of cuts creativity off right at the beginning?
it takes all of the oxygen out,
Wow.
right? I really believe this deeply, because when you start with doing something for God, that's different than with God.
Yes.
And it gets your brain focused on, okay, well, what could I do? Well, I'm really creative. I could, and people think this, I could do a lot of things. I mean, and then it gets overwhelming with what they could do, or they try to look at what's popular and just chase that.
Yes.
And do their version. The thing I always do and encourage people to do is start with curiosity. Start with, what can you not quit thinking about? What is it that you find your mind, your heart, your interest going to? And then let that be kind of a playground that you just spend time with God on.
Yes.
And so long before I will start to write, I will be observant and go, what is it that's capturing my sense of wonder, curiosity? And over time, I've come to see that's where God is wooing me and inviting me into. And so, like, John, between my first and second book that I wrote, there was a period of 4+ years, because I didn't feel like God was inviting me. I was curious about a lot of things, but I didn't feel like he had given me the next thing to pursue together with him. And then the second book, after I started writing that, well, I had 3 in the next 18 months.
3 more books.
3 more books.
Holy cow.
And so there is no formula to me. It really is start with curiosity. And remember, in Les Mis, there was a bishop, and Victor Hugo wrote about him. He wasn't so much a man who studied God, but was dazzled by God. And so my desire is, God, what are you inviting me into?
Yes.
I want you to bring me through the doorway of curiosity into something that we get to explore together. And then after I've gotten to that point, I'll start trying to put words to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is fascinating, because I was just having a conversation with a guy. He loves barbecue. He loves smoking meats. And he said that during COVID and the shutdown, he's going crazy. So he gets curious about, how do people do that? I love it when I go out. I love ribs. I love smoked brisket. How do they do that? So he gets online, of course, like we all do, disciples of the internet. And he builds himself not one, but 3 different types of smokers.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, and it was out of curiosity.
Yes.
Just the very thing you're saying. And here's a creative act. He's building smokers.
Right.
Right. He's not dancing.
Right.
He's not painting.
Yes.
Okay. He's not writing a book, but it was the Imago Dei in him to create a way of flourishing, and then, sharing it with others and the joy of the meal and all that stuff. Now he's loves it.
Yes.
And he's good at it. Isn't that cool?
Well, it's such a, when we talked about mystics, ordinary everyday mystics, you talked about children and mystics kind of together,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Well, what I think curiosity does is invite us to be young at heart, to risk being playful enough to pursue the things that bring us joy. And that's why I think with writers, for the most part, the first book that an author writes is the book I always want to read, because usually that's the one that nobody was offering them a contract for.
Yeah.
That there was no push other than,
yes.
You'll read stories like John Grisham. I read, when he was a young lawyer and he writes legal thrillers, when he was a young lawyer, he had a yellow legal pad. He would ride the bus to work. Nobody was asking him to write a legal thriller. He couldn't stop thinking about the story that became The Firm, which was his first big legal thriller. And I still think it's like his best book. And it came out of a pure sense of joy and pursuit of story. He wasn't trying to become a best-selling author in that moment.
Yes.
And usually somebody's 10th, 12th, 15th book, you go, I think I can see a little bit of formula now, because something's hardened in that author, calcified. Not all authors, but something's calcified where they're going back to the same well, wanting the same results of that first experience. And when that formula kicks in, instead of the wildness of pursuing God and with your curiosity, I think the result tends to be less than we want it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to come back to your writing, because you and I, we could chase these trails. So you get curious and you feel like God's in it and he's inviting you to write. Then what happens?
Then I decide to be as honest and transparent as I can about the journey that I'm on regarding that topic. And so if it's, and you can do this in fiction, or you can do this in nonfiction, or you can do it in any kind of calling or gifting, but to say, all right, if I'm writing a book about chaos, which was my second book, Chaos Can't, then I'm going to talk about my questions, my doubts, my fears. Why is the world filled with chaos? Why doesn't God tell us how to break free from chaos more? Oh, wait, maybe he does, and I've missed it. Where in that book, there's some stories where I would talk about when my children were younger, where I would take on the chaos of the atmosphere and get chaotic. And I have a lot of regrets about that, because in those moments, I basically, if they were chaotic, I would out chaos them to be the voice of, authority and shutting things down, when actually I had an invitation, if I look back, to have brought peace and calm and goodness into a situation by not taking the bait. So the second thing for me is, okay, I've been curious. I have the idea. Now, how do I risk in that telling of that idea to someone by not holding anything back, but just approaching it in a very vulnerable, real way? Because to me, John, I don't know about you, but that's the kind of art I'm drawn to, whether it's music, paintings, theater. Like that, when the artist feels like Hemingway has this great line of, there's nothing to being an author. All you have to do is cut your arm and bleed on the page. Basically. And that's what I think great creativity requires, is be honest, be transparent, and take people on a journey.
Oh, but you see, there's the shame thing we were talking about. If people do not feel the freedom,
right,
a little bit of the wholeheartedness. We're not talking about being perfectly wholehearted, perfectly restored, but on the journey towards wholeheartedness, you could see how shame would really shut that down.
Oh, totally.
Like, don't bleed on the page. Don't tell your own stories. Make it all shiny.
That's why so many pastors are telling stories from the pulpit of when their child was 4 years old and their child is 40.
Yes.
Like, they're not risking, where's your current vulnerability? Where's your current journey of growth? Like, give us that.
Oh, but because when you were talking about formula, I was thinking about so many churches wanting to do it right, wanting to attract people, wanting to draw people to God, and looking to the formula as opposed to asking God, what does that expression for us look like? With, right? We want to do this with you. So what is our version of that?
Yes.
With you, God.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. But one thing I have to, like, you just, this is a passion of mine. That's not happening in probably 95% of churches. And we know that because every week, the rhythm of the service is exactly the same. It ends exactly in an hour. There's 3 songs. There's the greeting. There's the message. There's the whatever. And that right there to me is troubling, because God is not a God of formula. And yet if our main church experience is so formulaic, we could do it with our eyes closed.
Okay. So with God versus for God is a really big idea. I am a very difficult author to publish because my publishers want a plan. They don't want to just know what's the current book. They want to know what's the next 3 books, so we can lay out this big publishing plan and the timing and the scheme. So they're like, okay, John, so what's the next thing you're going to write on?
Yes.
And my answer is, I don't know.
That is so disruptive to publishers.
I don't know. I honestly don't know, because I do not want to just make it up. I need to hear from God.
Yes.
And until I hear from God, and this is a fascinating story of the new book, that the series on mystics is that was out of a new book. I think people picked that up, which will come out next February. I had a contract. There was a manuscript due, but I didn't have it. I just didn't. My heart was not well enough to write. Through last fall, we had a lot going on at the ministry, a lot going on in our personal lives, and I just had no gas in the tank. Yeah. And so instead of flogging the horse, okay, you talked about don't start with task, start with curiosity. Okay, instead of flogging the horse, get to the task. I just went, I don't know. I'll let you know when I know. And I gave my heart permission to not produce, to not just, be the conveyor belt. And all of a sudden, early this year, I woke up one morning and I went, ding. My heart was like, when do we get to write? And it was it was beautiful. Yeah. It's like, it took courage and humility, and it took a massive amount of risk. Just go, wait. You're not there yet. You're not ready. Wait. And then the heart's alive, and writing was a joy again. And I was curious about, ordinary mystics and that life and prayer and all that. And then the new book, I wrote the new book in 3 months because it was flowing with God. God and I are now hooked up again. We are in harmony. We are in sync. And this is a couple more things. It's not a podcast about writing, but it is helpful to know when I sit down to write, I do not start with chapter 1, sentence 1, and just write a book linear through the book. Like, that's brutal. That's brutal on an author.
Yeah.
I have to write about what I'm curious about. Yeah. So I'll have a book mapped out that, it's kind of, I do it sort of in 3 stages. I have my curiosity stage. I'm reading, I'm listening, I'm having conversations. I walk out of, coffee with someone and I go, oh, that was such a good quote. I'm grabbing that. And I'll fill a journal with thoughts and ideas.
Yes.
Okay. And then section 2, part 2 is I'll bring order to it. There's the fierce mastery of Genesis. And I'll create a structure that then will help me birth that message. Okay.
Yes.
Then as I'm looking at those chapters, I go, you know what I'm curious about today? I am so intrigued about chapter 8. I'm just going to write there today because that's where my heart is alive. That's where it's responding versus the productivity, functionality, efficiency of no, get this thing done, man.
Right.
5,000 words per chapter. Okay. 60,000 words per book. You got to get this thing going.
Yes.
That doesn't work.
No. And people who measure their productivity as a writer in word count, I always push back against because it's like, it doesn't matter how many words you've written, but it matters if you're saying something that resonates with people.
Yeah.
So you're measuring the wrong thing.
Yeah.
The external isn't about the heart.
Yeah.
John, what is the hardest part for you when you're writing a book? Like what do you have to push through the most as a writer?
Turn off the voice that says, what are people going to think of this? I can't write to the audience. I can't. That is a killer to me. You know what I'm talking about? That the critical, the critic, right?
Yes.
Who's standing outside the story. He's right there going, that wasn't said very well. That's not an interesting story. People are going to freak out when you use the word mystics. You can't say mystics, all that. Wow. Okay. That thing, man, I just go, that's not why I'm writing. I'm not writing for my critics. I'm not writing for the public. I'm writing. It's Eric Little's line, the famous Olympic runner.
Yes.
Yeah.
Chariots of Fire.
Yeah. He says, because when I run, I feel his pleasure. That's with.
Yes.
There is an intimacy that Little said, this is, God made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. I have to write out of my deep, deep life with God. And in many ways, I'm writing for an audience of one. Now, I do have my audience in mind because I want to take them somewhere, right? As an abbot, as a spiritual father,
right?
I really do care very deeply for my readers. And I want to help them and bring them into a deeper life and restoration and safety in God.
Yes.
Okay. But I can't listen to the critic, the analyst, right?
Yeah.
I just can't do that. That kills me.
Yeah. And you're, to me, one of the best writers at going at the rhythm and pace that God's inviting you into. Like, you're one of the rare writers who has said from the beginning, I'm not going to sign a contract to write a book every December or every X months.
Right.
Like, I love how, I remember this when I was in publishing, and I knew you then through Wild at Heart before I joined the team. And I remember them talking about, no, John doesn't do it that way. John writes a book when he has something to say.
Yes.
And so that's rare. And we can do that in our gifting, when it comes to certain creative outlets. But like, if you're a parent, well, you can't wait until you're ready to, feeling the mood to be creative, right, with your 6-year-old or your 12-year-old sports team. But I think that even then, the beautiful thing is when we do it with God, John, my favorite verse is Jeremiah 33:3, which is where God says, call to me and I'll show you things beyond your wildest imagination, things you've never heard of, dreamt of, never seen before. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's an invitation that's based on relationship. So it's an if then. Call to me, come to me, invite me in. Wow. Let's do this together.
Yeah.
And I'll show you things that'll blow your mind.
Yes.
And that's for parenting. It's for a husband and wife. It's for home life. It's for, our job. It's for our creativity. Like, it's a beautiful invitation where God says, I want to do this with you. So the pressure's off to feel like it, to have all the answers, to be the expert. All you have to do is come with me, God says, in your desires and passions that I've given you, and then let's do it together. And I think that's a freeing thing that for me always takes the shame away.
That's so huge. I have to jump on that because you you use two different words, two different expressions that don't normally get linked. You talked about your gifts, your dreams, your passions, and you're doing it with God. Okay, here's why. Because most people, when they want to chase a dream, when they want to let their passions come alive, they don't inquire of God. They think that their dreams and passions equal the will of God. And this has hurt many, many, many dear souls. People who wanted to become missionaries, when they were young marrieds and they're 23 and they're headed off to a brutal place in the world. Yes. The passion was beautiful. It was not with God. And they lost heart. They got really hurt out there because they weren't ready for it, right? The darkness, the warfare, the criticism, the trials, all that. And so I want to say this as gently as I can. God cares deeply about your dreams and your passions and desires. He really does. He cares about your life as a musician, poet, architect, attorney, teacher. He does. But that doesn't equal the will of God. So you had 4 years between your first book and your second book because God was not moving. Right? This is so critical, folks. You want to take all those dreams, all those desires, even if they're little tiny emerging sprouts, if they're just little saplings and they're coming up, you want to immediately hook that up to Jesus, hook it up to your Papa, and say, Father, what are we doing together in this? And even what is the timing of this? How are we going to do this together so that you don't get hurt? Right. Just chasing a dream. Right.
And you have to have, I think that to me, the thing I always come back to keep me on track is to say, am I more intrigued by God and my time with God or by the gift?
Yes.
Whatever the gift is, yes. A writer, a coach, because what we tend to do is get really enamored with our strength, our gift, our talent.
Yeah.
And then we spend far more time pursuing that, looking for validation through that, trying to make our mark with that, than we do with our interest and fascination and love and desire to just be with God. And I think that to me, John, is kind of the internal catch.
Oh, it's just huge, Alan.
What am I looking at most first? And if it's the thing, whatever the thing is, the identity, the gift, the status.
We want to build a guest cottage. We want to take the kids, on a trip to Yellowstone. No, you don't understand. Of course God's in this because we're so excited about it.
Right.
Not the same thing.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And so when we can do that, we keep our first love. We go back to Eden where we're walking with God in the cool of the day first, and then saying, Papa, Father, what do you have for me?
Yes.
Versus, no, I'm good. I'll let you know if I need any help.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's really good. Wow. That's really good. So friends, this was kind of about creativity. It was a little bit about writing. It was a lot about human restoration will result in wild creativity. And that wild creativity is going to express itself a lot of different ways in people's lives. But also human restoration is helped through creativity and risk-taking and throwing the cloak of shame off and just trying something, getting your hands back in the soil, right? Picking up that trombone after 40 years, right? It is, because it's like the patience of Oliver Sacks when they began to play music and you had these folks suddenly singing hymns again who couldn't remember their own name. And they are remembering all of the words to a long hymn that no one could get out any information from them. Otherwise, like, oh, the beauty of God is about our recreation. That's what he's up to in your life. And as that recreation is taking place, his image comes forth. And his image is fierce mastery in the world. It is bringing beauty to our worlds. I love bringing beauty to the
Yes.
world. I just love it. Whether it's a dinner we're throwing, and Stacy she's
Mm.
so great at it. She's like, no, honey, let's put the flowers here and let's use these plates or this placemat tonight. Like bringing beauty
Yes.
to the world. It's all so life-giving,
Yes.
and it is an expression of redemption, right? And
Right.
that's why the glory of God is his sons and daughters fully alive, right? Because it is the
Yes.
gospel doing its thing in us and
Yes.
getting expressed through our creativity and gifting in the world.
Yeah. And if someone is hearing this and is stirring an emotion, but they don't know what to do, I think the first step is a small step of find what brings you joy that God has put within you
Mm,
and get a taste of it again. Listen to that song, go to the park,
yes.
go to an art museum, just do something that stirs in you that wonder again, but don't do it alone. Invite God into it
Yeah.
and then ask him, Papa, what do you have next for me?
Yeah. That's so beautiful. Papa, what do you have for us? What do you have for us? So we're going to end with another pause. Before you rush on, let's take that prayer that Alan suggested and just linger for a moment, just in your heart. In fact, I find it helpful to repeat it over and over again. Just repeat the simple prayer. So, Papa, Father, Jesus, Holy Spirit, what are you saying to me? What are we doing together in this? And just linger with that.